Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast. This podcast for designers, creators, and founders. And today we have Sam, who is a product designer and has great skills in design systems. And she works especially for like startups. And she focuses on building scalable products and designing products for startup. She's also a design instructor and me and Sam met at SoCal UX Group when I used to be in Southern California. So I'm very excited to have Sam here on the podcast to discuss about design systems and product design. Welcome, Sam. To start with, I would love to learn how you got into design and how is your journey been so far.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief and tight. Do type 5. I went to middle school and high school at a weird arts conservatory school. It's in Santa Ana. It's called OSHA. If anyone else locally went there, I did graphic design. I did performance. I did pop vocals, improv, graphic, visual, film, screenwriting, all that stuff. So I kind of got all the artistic mojo jojo out of my system when I was quite young. So I sort of knew how that felt. And then in college, it was obvious to me that what I needed to learn was some business and money skills. So I did that there. Then I tried to go to law school at one point because my parents are lawyers. I didn't like it. And then I worked at advertising agencies, and I kind of just realized the thing I was really passionate about was creating stuff and finding real humans' needs and filling that gap with solutions. I met some other people who did web development boot camps, and they were succeeding, and I tried to learn how to code, and I'm bad at it. And then I stumbled across the industry of UX UI, and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect for me. I love talking about how bad websites are and then fixing them. So it came pretty naturally to me. I did the boot camp thing. I networked my way into finding a couple of startups and very small companies. And used my sort of small scale adaptable skills to just figure out what those kind of small companies needed and just do that. So that's where I've been for the last couple of years.
That's awesome. And I also forgot to tell you also do stand-up comedy. That's very like an interesting thing you have going on with your product design profession. You want to like tell a little bit about that too, so that audience know your other side of your profession.
Yeah, I was gonna say it at the end. I actually do improv a lot more than stand up.
Mhm.
Because stand up is you have to plan for that. Improv, you just show up and
Mhm.
you just start saying words. But there's actually not it. The stuff I've learned in improv and training and being on stage and reading an audience is so similar to what I try to help people think about when they're in a room with a startup and they're being given, loosey goosey descriptions of what's the way that you think about that problem and approach it. You need to come up with solutions very fast. You need to break them very fast. You need to not get married to your process. You need to constantly be adapting what you're doing and saying to the actual thing in front of you, not what you think it should be, what the thing is you're actually seeing, and change it really quick. And that is a muscle that gets trained on stage that is
Mhm.
helpful in product as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I always believed that the improv skills are like helpful to like kind of tell the stories you want to trying to tell and then able to quickly think on your feet. That's very interesting. I feel like this could be an entire another whole podcast on its own. Yeah,
I know.
today we are focusing on design systems, so I'll bring discuss more on that. So yeah, I think like when I think of Sam, I know I came to your first talk in Southern California on design systems, which was very interesting, and especially for like startups. You've been focused on that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into design systems and kind of like build expertise in that space?
Yeah. Design systems, I feel like, is often thought about something that a larger company only has the luxury of micromanaging. But in my experience, design systems was something I had to deal with at a small company because it was always engineer led. Always, it had to pass through a brick wall of, what is the lead engineering manager going to say about this? If whatever I design can't quickly and easily be communicated to an engineer, no one's going to want to build at the end. So that's sort of how the necessity of design systems came up, because that's always the first question that engineers are going to ask. Either they're going to do it with you or without you. They're going to take apart your design and figure out how to turn it into components one way or another. And it's more helpful if you're sort of on the same team. You're not like passing a football that you never see again. You're working on the project at the same time. You're sitting alongside the engineer. You've created this, creative art piece, just sort of in theory, for is this going to solve a problem for a user? But it needs to get built somehow. So the first thing an engineer is going to do is look at this, especially at small companies, because you're building so much so quick. It doesn't need to be
Mm.
perfect. They're not micromanaging the exact, if the flow is ideal, if this one presentation of a date picker is ideal. Those aren't questions they're asking. They're asking, how can we make this quicker? How can we not have to
Mm.
do this again? They're going to take a design and go, yep, I can reuse this. Yep, I can reuse this. And that's how they're going to build it. So the more that you as the designer can design it that way, the more you and the engineers are not going to be at odds. You're going to be on the same team solving the same problem the same way. And then they're not going to have this whole base of stuff that they didn't communicate with you. You help them develop that plan. You know exactly how they're going to build it, which is crucial as a non-technical designer to sort of become technical, at least in that way. So
Yeah, you bring up that very good point. In startups, speed is everything, right? And the concept you brought about the design handoff, like there is this concept in our industry like handoff, but you not really like handoff. You work with them, like you mentioned, alongside with them. I know you've been focused mostly on startups, and I think I also feel like the bigger companies kind of operate like startups nowadays, like breaking down into like smaller chunks because it's so fast to innovate that way. Have you seen any differences between like startups and like big companies handle like design systems? Any insights on that? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I have precisely zero experience with any company larger than
Yeah.
10 people. My engineering
Yeah.
teams have always been, six devs and
Mm.
me. That's it. We have another designer now, but she just came on and I'm helping to train her. So that's kind of the only perspective I can speak of. But I have spoken to designers that have worked on larger teams or have been trained in the way that is poised for a larger company. And I think the way you design for other designers is different than the way you design for non-designers. And if your company is small, there aren't a lot of other designers. It could just be you or a couple of other people. And even then you could be grouped up into smaller teams where you're the only designer on that team. So if your immediate team members are engineers, the way you do things is just very, very different. To me,
Mm.
it feels more grounded. It feels more real. If you're in a very large company where you get to sort of live in your fantasy design land, it feels like that's kind of, it's not how things are actually getting built. That's a world you're being allowed to live in and explore the theory of things and do the human research and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the great filter of what is the engineer going to actually build, they're going to have to pass through that one way or another. It's just how far in the future is that going to happen? So the more you can plan for that ahead of time, I think these scrappy startup skills, I do think they scale. You
Mm.
need them at small company level, but if you can carry that to a large company, I think that's refreshing for a lot of the people involved, because one way or another, that's how it's going to get built. So the more you can take that into account, that is going to be valuable. The other thing with big companies is that I should have said this first. Small companies, if you're the only designer, like they're not going to have a design system yet. The engineers will
Mm.
because it's in their code, but they won't have that design file, or if they do, it's kind of a mess. At a large company, they
Mm.
have hundreds of people working on the design system already. So you might be on that team or you might not be on that team, but you're using rules that someone else already wrote. Versus you're the person who has to sit down with a blank page and write the rules yourself. So that's the biggest difference, I think.
Yeah, you bring up that very interesting point of taking ownership. Like there's no rule book, but you write your own rules, right? And then I think like the way the industry is heading, what I see, it's optimizing designing products for scale. and it's like, how do we make this scalable, right? That's how designers are thinking in like systems. And then I follow a lot of Dan Moll's teaching, and he says that anything that helps us for efficiency and help us to optimize our processes is a system. And it could be a conversation, it could be a component library, it could be a documentation. Yeah, that's a very interesting thought you brought. So that I feel like design system has like the operational side, governance side, and all that stuff, right? And then also the tactical, the building of things side. As a startup designer, you do have to do both. But if somebody is like starting out or wanting to get into a design system, and how should they go about it? Yeah.
You mean if they're at a company and there's no design system and someone is feeling like they need one?
No, it's asking more of a perspective of a designer, like let's say a junior designer or designer getting started in their profession and wants to go about learning
Okay.
design systems. How can they go when there are so much complexity of like governance as well as like making of things? Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is something to the idea that because UX design evolved from graphic design, which evolved from creative arts, there is the assumption going in from a certain perspective that UX design is a form of creative art, and that's where you should start. And I think there are very few real life instances where you're going to have the luxury to actually start to solve a problem that way. I think it is more helpful to think about it like you're an engineer. You are a form of developer that isn't coding. So the more that you can accept the fact that, like for me personally, because there was never a moment where I had the luxury to just have a creative thing and then see it turn into code. That I've never seen that succeed for me. So it was pretty obvious to me starting out that if this thing didn't exist as a component, it wasn't going to get built. I don't touch, no matter how small the project is, I will make the component first, always. I will not there is nothing on my canvas that is not purple. You know what I mean? Everything's purple because that's the first place the person that's going to build it is going to start. They're going to say, they're going to pull, especially the size of the company, whether they already have something. Very likely they will be using an existing library, like a Bootstrap, like a Material UI, like something they're already using, or even their own personal kit that they've already built things on. That's where they're going to start. So you have to start somewhere similar to that too, because that's the first thing that someone's going to do when they're building the thing. So I simply will not create a design without having a design system. So you can either go into the Figma community and take one and start building using that, or you could find a Bootstrap kit. You could make your own UI kit that you use for all of your designs that you make for various clients. But generally the headspace of don't start designing until you're using all purple Lego pieces, that I think has been a powerful mind shift that helps ensure my designs are easy to build. I think sometimes high visual design can suffer because I'm like, if it's not a component, I can't use it. But I think engineers are happy with me because of that. Makes their job a lot easier, and it makes the stuff I'm making a lot easier to implement. So sometimes, perfection, don't let perfect get in the way of good. You know what I mean? If they need something out the door, they don't need it to be perfect. They need it to be done. And the best way to do that is to start with your purple Lego blocks.
Yeah, I just wrote that down. What you said. If it's not a component, I won't use it. I feel it could be like a T-shirt, and I think that goes to show how like the designers and product designers kind of like need to think of scale. If it's not just for one screen, right? It's going to be for the next 100 screen or 1,000 screens, and which is used by millions of people as a user, but also internally, like the developer has to maintain that consistency. So, and you mentioned about kind of starting out with creating components in Figma or like using the existing design systems, kind of understand it. I think that's very so crucial. And the way Figma is moving, also they're like focusing so much on like this variables, modes, and building like better documentation for design system. And then with auto layout, it's almost the way how developers create a component, right? So I feel like there is that blend that is happening. Do you have any take on like Figma's focus on product design and how they are advancing the tool?
Yes. I am hoping that designers begin to view the Figma updates not as, ooh, shortcuts for me. I may or may not use this. And instead as a gentle nudge toward like, hey guys, this is how things get built. You should use these, not because it will help you. It will actually make your job harder, but you should use them
Mm,
anyway because it will make the entire product process easier. It's like how it's so tempting to detach components instead of going to the original and adding a variant. It's tempting. Everyone wants to do that. But if you solve it in one place, you've now lost. For you, it's done because it looks done. But the engineer now has to follow the breadcrumb trail going, okay, well, what was this? What did you add? The adding the variable to the original component is something the engineer is going to have to do anyway. So it might as well be you that does it. As soon as variables come, I'm famous for going to config and then the next day coming back to work and redoing everything in my component file to add the new feature. As soon as variables came out, I'm like, oh, we're doing this now. And that has sparked a different way that we as a company think about colors. Or it sort of revealed, at least to me, that I wasn't realizing how the engineers were already doing colors. What was happening is they were just doing it their way, and I was getting cut out of the process. They were taking what they saw from my work, digesting it in their own developer way, and then it was making customization difficult because we had a different way that we were solving the color problem. So for features like component variants, the Boolean properties, the variables that you use to have colors reference other colors, that if that to you feels complicated and scary, welcome to web development. So the more you can
mm,
digest that, at least in Figma's ecosystem, I tried to learn to code. I did a whole coding boot camp. I wasn't very good at it. But I understand how similar the Figma features are to what they're doing in CSS and Sass files, which is where your designs are going to end up anyway. So if you start doing that in Figma and your stuff is really organized, the developers can go into dev mode and they can do it precisely the way that you've done it. And then you're in agree. Then now the whole process, the people involved are looking at the same system and doing it the same way. They're not like having a conversation that you're not in. You set it up over here and they just took it and used it instead of them having to like do weird stuff and change it to make it useful over here. Figma's allowing you to build things in such a way that a developer can just take and use. The more you can set up literally your layers and all of your component properties to precisely match how a React component would be built, you're in business now. Then everyone's job is easier, and then everyone understands what the different states are, variables are, blah, 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 blah. Everyone agrees. So
the hair. Yeah, I felt the same after coming from conflict. Oh my god, everything is changed. I was thinking to create a course, but I need to like rethink everything. So
yeah,
it's very fascinating how Figma is changing. I was just looking at all the prototyping changes also they are doing, so they're constantly evolving. That's awesome. You touched a little bit about how designers can get started, but if a company is planning to build a design system from scratch, like what would your take and thoughts on that? Yeah.
design systems are really, to me, about honesty
Mm,
and transparency because development teams have to come up with the rules anyway. That's how it works. So either they're including the business people and the designers in that situation or they are not. Because more than likely they're going to be using React. They're going to be using something that has a component tool in it, and they're going to be making their own decisions about how things work. Every time I've tried to like make a fun little custom thing that I didn't write up in the design system, guess what? They didn't make it. They just skipped that part. So they're going to have their way that they do it. They say, well, I set up the page this way. These are the margins on all of our pages because it's kept in this file and that's what it's saying to do. Code rules, they trickle down to the different files, the scoping and whatever. I'm butchering this. But You set a rule in one place and it affects all the other places that it's touching. That's just how it's going to work. So for you as a business, what you're saying when you decide that you're going to be in on design systems is you're going to decide to be included on the conversation that the developers are already having. You're setting the rules and they are listening to your rules as opposed to setting it themselves, because they're going to have to set it at some point. They just weren't inviting you into that room. So if you want to have a consistent language that you as a business are able to decide on, for some reason, you might say, yeah, okay, well, the margins are this way on this type of page most of the time. But for me as a business owner, I understand that I want maybe some landing pages to look different. I want to have a say in that conversation. That's the point at which you set up rules that have code in it, but also have design pieces in it and also have text descriptions in it, so that non-technical business stakeholders can see and understand what is going on and why. Designers can understand what is going on and why, and developers can understand what is going on and why, because those are three different languages that in a design system that works well, those three people need to find what they need in that dictionary, or else it's not very useful. So yeah, but I mean, for a small company that doesn't have one, I mean, likely they're going to be using a kit like a Bootstrap anyway. I'm a big fan of that. I know some people, larger companies, like to build everything from scratch. My very, very talented manager has told me up and down a million times why he doesn't like to do it custom, and that's because things like accessibility, responsive, really complicated things that are very painful and manual to do. If you forget one ARIA label, oops, lawsuit, that you don't want that to be you. So if you take a Bootstrap and you're just adding your own little sprinkle and flavor onto it, there's a lot of power there. You don't have to reinvent slightly different wheels if you're doing it that way. And that way, you're doing less work and there's more room for a business person or a designer to come in and have a conversation about the rules you want to add on top, because they're less technical, they're easier to discuss. Yeah.
And then you bring up such a good perspective of, especially like developers' perspective in design, and that's something many designers like struggle with. Like they look at it only through the lens of design and not holistically of operations, business value for the business, time, and then development as well. Because I think like startups or any companies, honestly, time is money, right? So that's a very interesting problem design system solves to improve the efficiency. I will ask you a controversial question, since you're bringing a lot of designers and developer collaboration. Should designers learn to code?
I've had long discussions about this. My very wonderful and talented boss, again, swears up and down he thinks all designers should 100% learn how to code. I have had to no. I did a whole web development bootcamp, to be clear. I gave it my best shot and failed, just being really real about that one. The problem is, I don't think, because I've seen some of the unicorns do their work, but I think at some point you have to pick one, because there is not enough time in the day to do, unless your company is two people and it's two people starting a startup. I think two design-minded coders can build a powerful startup company until you scale. And then as soon as you add, now your company's 6 people, now there's too much to do. You needed to, I at one point was being asked to explore the possibility of me coding React components myself and coding the design system. That's something I could have grown into being able to do, but I chose not to because there was no one at the time that was going to pick up all of the work that wasn't code. I think the pressure from engineers is coming from the fact that they don't understand how much work can and should exist that has nothing to do with code. That you need to research a lot of other things, you need to try things, you need to set up your Figma stuff. There's a lot of non-coding work that designers do still need to do. If you are an octopus and have 8 arms and 100 hours a week that you want to work and you want to code as well, be my guest. But it is my experience that there is simply too much design work to justify every designer also hopping into VS Code. There's too much other stuff. You have to specialize. There's too much other stuff needs to be done. However, I think every designer should take a coding class. Do I think you should code for your job? No. Do I think you should know how, if the world is melting down, and or to be able to have a conversation with an engineer about how components would go? Yes. I didn't understand anything about computer science. I literally started Googling what is the internet back end, how does it, like, that was the stupid stuff like I was doing. And I had to get myself over that hurdle first. And since I started doing that and having conversations with even the back end people, like some of my design stuff has I've been asked to think about databases and how databases are set up and how things are displayed. I don't think you get a pass on not understanding that. I don't think I don't wanna is a good excuse for I don't want to touch databases. I don't want to touch the back end. I don't understand API requests. You need to understand that. But I don't think it is productive as part of a designer's job to actually do the work at your job. But if you can't have a conversation with a back end engineer and understand what they're saying, you're missing out on a lot of stuff that they're just going to not invite you in the room anymore. And that's not a good position to be in because designers already have to like fight for relevancy. So the more that you can position yourself as, no, I understand what you're saying. I get your concerns as an engineer, but you need to arm yourself for that conversation because that conversation is coming. So should you learn how to code? Yes. Should you be coding? No.
Love that. I think that summarize all of that internet, the fight and the discussion. Yeah, you should learn to code, but you should not be coding. And yeah, I think at some point the amount of design work itself is going to be so much, and then you have to do stakeholder alignment along with the implementation and production design work. But you also answered my follow up question on to what extent they need to code. I feel like the answer is to an extent that we can speak the language of a developer and can be in the same room of them so that they value uh, what you are proposing as well. That's very interesting. And I think as a product designer nowadays, you have to be able to speak different language in like different rooms. Like when you're talking to business, you cannot be talking the design principles and heuristic principles, right? There you have to speak about value proposition and customer experience and things like that. When you're a developer, when they say start talking about APIs, if you have no clue about APIs, then like it's gonna be hard for you to even ask any questions. So you bring up that very interesting topic. I want to like switch gears a little bit and kind of go like outside a design system and speak a little bit about like just design career or your personal brand specifically. I know when we were doing the cohort, one of the thing that stood out was like you had such a strong personal brand. And do you have any tips or insights for product designers or any creators or even like founders trying to build their own personal brand and how they can go about it?
Yeah, to me, this has just been a fun thing I've been doing. I haven't seen any proof in the pudding that it's helped me a whole lot yet, but I think, all designers they're here because they're creative and they have fun ideas. Every designer's house that I've been to has funky, cool interior design. It's something that comes naturally to people who have already chosen design as their career. But I think in some spaces there's the idea that you need to dial it back to be palatable. And I think that's what's hurting people because in this market that's kind of oversaturated and there's so many junior designers that no one can tell apart. We could take boot camps where the portfolios look identical to each other. There is a temptation that when you're starting and you're a junior, that you need to fit in with a pack, but fitting in doesn't help you. So there's a dance between I want to be authentic and original and artistic, and I want to give you a memorable, unique, flashy, here's me, I'm a performer, but you don't want to do it in a way that's so excessive that it's beginning to look A, unprofessional, and B, just loudly advertising that you're more dedicated to your flashy business cards than you are to like understanding the actual industry. Such as, I think it's common when people are writing their LinkedIn headers to be like creative visionary. Like I did that myself. Like I remember that because you think it's original and you're like, A, not original. B, you're loudly advertising. You don't know what you're talking about. So you don't want to do that. But I think there are some things that are that you do want to be streamlined on. Like don't be creative here. Don't be creative here. Don't be creative here. But aside from that, please do something that someone's going to remember you by, because that's kind of all you have in a room where everyone has the same job title. You want to at least approach it in a way that no one's saying you can't have a weird font as your like top line. You don't want to have a weird font as your body text, but you can have a weird font up here. So like take those places where there is room to be creative and be as creative as you can be there, while also showing I also know how to stop being creative as soon as it stops being productive. And I think that split shows that you are, in fact, adaptable. Different size problems that you know how to read a room and say, I can be crazy here and I can dial it way back here. I can be inches relatives both. So, yeah, so go nuts, be creative, hold back. Except in your LinkedIn title, hold back there.
Yeah, I love the way you worded it. Think like I see like the way the creativity is heading is more towards like the problem solving side of creativity, and sometimes like on their resumes on LinkedIn, designers try to be so like creative, which is not aligned with their stories and everything. Yeah, like saying, okay, I build innovative products through empathy for customers is it's fine to say that, but then it does not tell like your story, or does not speak about, like you mentioned, the memorable aspect of it. Yeah, I think that's very interesting take, especially on building personal brand. Have fun with it. Be specific about who you are and kind of position yourself that way on LinkedIn and other platform you are using, and especially like in this crowded market where you don't want to be like everyone, right? They need to remember you for something. That makes a lot of sense. So as final part of this podcast, again, I'm so excited you joined this and shared all this insight. These are like valuable insight that you do not find in like university education or boot camps or anywhere, right? Like these are coming from like your experience. And when I started to create this podcast, the one thing about like content in general, like you can ask any fact to chat GPT or AI models and you get answers for it. Like, why would my content be different from that? So that's where I thought like it needs to be experience driven, like defined based on experience, beliefs, and the journeys people go through, and kind of share that in this podcast. As final takes, is there any go-to resources you go to keep yourself updated about design systems or product design as a whole, or any recommendations you have?
I don't know. I don't do much like external resources. I don't follow a lot of like influencers. Ooh, every time Figma releases something, they also have a playground file that they release. I get on that playground file the day it comes out. I'm surprised the number of designers that I encounter that still don't know how to use components and don't like them. Nothing in their file is purple. And I'm like, what are you doing? So I would say consistently stay up to date on what Figma's doing. Not even because I'm a Figma worshiper or anything, but they're doing a pretty good job of your tap, like staying up to date with what the world of development is doing. The modern tools that are I'm big on Framer now. Framer was your suggestion. Framer rules. I got. So I think if you're staying up to the cutting edge of like what's happening, you'll see that they're all kind of doing the same stuff. And that's how you sort of know what the current thing is that's happening. If you're doom scrolling on Facebook, just doom scroll on LinkedIn instead. A lot of cool stuff is happening that way. If you have a lot of friends on there that you're following and they're doing stuff. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think I always use the community file to create content on my YouTube, and they're like so well put together. That's very interesting thing you shared, and that's a good way to stay updated. Yeah, those are like helpful resources, Sam. And is there any final takes that you want to share around design systems career, or anything that you feel like sharing for the conclusion of this podcast?
Take an improv class.
Okay.
All the skills that I'm talking about how to be adaptable in a very quickly changing startup environment. If taking an improv class is terrifying to you because you don't like to think that quick and you don't like to stand up in front of a room and talk, guess what? Those are skills you need for the rest of your life. And there's a lot of things at work that require those skills that you're probably avoiding right now. So the more improv classes that you take, the more comfortable you are to just quickly move and surf a very turmoil-ridden startup product environment. That craziness doesn't scare you anymore. It's something that is part of life, and it's fun to adapt and think quick. So don't be terrified of taking class.
I love that. I think if you ever teach any course or anything like that, probably that's going to be improv for product designers. As designers, find myself spending too much time on meetings and stakeholder alignment. That's where I feel like improvs are like 80% of the skills there. That's awesome. How can people find you, connect with you, and reach out to you if they have any questions? What's like the best place?
I am Samantha Vivonia at LinkedIn, and my portfolio website is samanthavivonia.com. You can yell at me on LinkedIn and say, "Wow, I liked your podcast. Let's hang out." I usually tell those people yes. So slide in the DMs. I'm easy to find. There's only one Vivonia on the internet.
And thanks for giving that option for people like, hey, I like your podcast, like to connect. I think some people don't know like how do I approach the person. So that's a good take you gave to the audience. Yeah. And I'll include all those links to connect with Sam in the description wherever you are seeing this. Yeah, Sam, thank you so much for your time and joining this podcast on this week on the weekend. And we learned a lot of insightful things from you, especially navigating design systems and different pillars of building a design system, and how designers can adapt to the changes, how they can get started, and how companies need to think about design system. You shared perspective from like so many different directions, and thanks for sharing about your personal brand. Thank you for sharing about you know the non-design skills designers need to know. And I feel like that could be another whole podcast on improv for product designers. Thank you again. Have a great weekend. Do subscribe and follow whichever platform you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, so you stay updated with all the awesome content I'm creating for you to level up in your profession. Thank you.